Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Songbirds and Snakes of all movies, that's right, the Hunger Games prequel, actually dominates a Disney animated film. That's right, not only did Songbirds and Snakes make more than the new film from Disney called Wish, it also was able to potentially justify its existence with the amount of money that it is bringing in. So, of course, we'll talk a little bit further about that. As we all know from last week's video, there is a little bit of a financial situation within the making of Songbirds and Snakes that makes the actual break-even point for the film a lot lower. But the fact is, and the fact still remains, that it did very, very well over the Thanksgiving holiday. And so we'll kind of talk about where that puts the film in as far as the historical context of the franchise and also where it actually stands as an individual film, an individual release. But we, of course, have to talk about the film Wish. So this is the 100-year anniversary celebration film, which you would think would mean this is going to be one of the best films that they've ever put out. And instead, what we got was a very bland by-the-numbers movie. I unfortunately have seen it, and no one saw it. Right? Very, very few people have actually gone to see it, and we'll talk about just exactly how much money this made domestically and worldwide. I think it's fascinating and find it fascinating that a lot more of the focus for this film is being put on its complete worldwide numbers because its domestic is just that low. And we'll do a little bit of comparisons between this and another film from Disney Pixar earlier this year, this from Disney Animation, but again, obviously from the same overall company. And that was the film Elemental, which if you actually compare apples to apples or you actually look at the numbers themselves, let's just say it's looking really, really bad for Wish, given that it had the holiday framework. Napoleon also came in well over expectations, and there's a question of whether it will be able to hold throughout the holiday frame, the holiday season, as we get further into December, get closer to Christmas. Will it be able to leg out as long as another film like Oppenheimer was able to do, for instance? It's not seeing the same kinds of numbers, or not expected to see the same kinds of numbers at the very least, but still could see the film do a lot better than what initial anticipation, initial indications seem to have been. So we'll talk about all these things and more. Before getting further, please make sure you smash that like button. A lot of the fun about I see smash the rumble button as well. And also make sure that you're subscribed to the channel with that bell notification. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. Also, please make sure to share this video out as well, so that way people can know further about what the box office and what's going on with the box office. If you find this fun, entertaining, or informative, let them know, especially when we talk about things like this. So Tony at Deadline. That's right. Our good friend Tony is back at it once again, right? Trying to play cover for these various studios. In this case, though, he is running with the only real news that he really has to go with at this point, which is that Songbirds and Snakes is actually doing pretty well. Other than that, in Napoleon, most of the big releases that we have had over the last month, especially with the Marvels and now with Wish, have just been catastrophic disasters in so many different ways. Songbirds and Snakes has basically had a bit of a revival this week because of it being the holiday frame. A lot of high school students, college students mostly, who are going to be the primary ones in attendance, female-driven audience here. Having that holiday off has helped it. The big question there, and I always have this question for any film whenever there's a holiday frame, is, okay, but how much of that's actually going to hold through the third week of release when it's no longer a holiday weekend, right? Because it makes a lot of sense for people to be going to see a movie during a holiday break when you're back home with your family. You have a little bit more free time. Is another to try to actually go onto a regular weekend, and if those numbers actually will hold nonetheless. Also, it's interesting that Tony is writing here in a news column. However, he is consistently and always giving opinion. And it's always something that is very clearly being shown here. And it's not even just an opinion as far as what he thinks as an expert on box office. He's giving his actual opinion of what things actually deserve for the film. Now, again, people might say, well, you do the same thing. Well, I've never claimed to be a completely objective news analyst that is writing under a website, a mainstream website like Deadline, under the news section, right? All I'm saying is that, hey, just like I would be under the opinion section, I would expect someone like Tony to be under the opinion section as well, because let's just say there's a lot of it in this bit of news. As you can see right here, it says The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes won Black Friday and Saturday at the box office respectively with 11.4 and 11.2 million, soaring above a Disney animated movie, which are typically the champs of Thanksgiving, and a big streamer in Apple's $200 million war epic Napoleon. That's right, Napoleon, a 3-hour drama war epic, beat a Disney animated movie at the box office over Thanksgiving. If you want to know just how bad it is right now for the film Wish, that should be a great indicator, right? Obviously, that's a good sign, and it speaks a lot to some of the word of mouth going on with Napoleon, but it's also saying a lot about where families are when it comes to their Disney animated films. We saw this happen a couple years ago. I think that really we can find the box office specifically being massive disappointments for Disney, going all the way back to a film like Lightyear. I think it all really stems from when Disney decided to get involved in the Florida politics, right, and tried to speak out in that way, and had all these people coming out trying to talk about how they were clearly trying to indoctrinate, clearly trying to put politics and all this other gender non-conforming nonsense into their movies and into their content. And a lot of families, I think, said, yeah, you know what, screw that. I don't want my kids to be anywhere near any of those things, with even the perception of it, right? I think that the brand has just been so damaged that it's going to be very difficult for them to not only regain the trust of families, but also to be able to actually recoup from the massive mistakes they've made by focusing so much of their attention on Disney Plus over the years, right? There's multiple reasons as to why Disney is in the position that it's in, but to try to ignore what happened when they got involved politically in Florida, for instance, I think that that is definitely going to be, if you decide to ignore those types of things, missing out the point quite a bit. It goes on to say right here that the France Lawrence directed prequel, here talking about Hunger Games, should hit $100 million by Monday. Quite often one hears the tired line from distributors when they come to under expectations for the weekend. We look forward to a great run during the holidays. However, that was no line, but a bona fide truth for Songbirds and Snakes. Holiday moviegoers, and here is the line, woke up to the great movie that it is. Now, I've also seen this movie as well, and though it is not the worst film that I've ever seen, to say that it is a great movie is just nonsensical. I mean, if you're going to compare this movie to the franchise that it's a part of, right, the Hunger Games franchise, it does not even hold a candle to the worst film in that franchise, right? It does not even really hold a candle to... And they are talking about Mockingbird, Mockingjay, whatever the last two movies, right, when they decided to split it into two. The first of that was okay. The second of that was not as good. And so I look to even that and think I would much rather go back and watch the Jennifer Lawrence films, even the ones that aren't very good, than ever watch this one again. As many interesting concepts that it does introduce about the world of Panem, the characters themselves really just aren't all that compelling, right? You might have some interesting things going on with the character of Snow, but his character, especially at the very end, is so rushed in his development, one could hardly argue that it's even being developed at all. So that's how, of course, you add in your own additional commentary, Tony, but this is the reason why also he should not be under news, but should rather be under the opinion section, as he is trying to say this. As the industry domestic end game for this movie is around $150 million, and I think that that's probably what they suspect the film to get to. The big question, of course, is going to be, how does it do in the non-holiday frame? Going into the numbers, though, over at thenumbers.com, we can see that Hunger Games, A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, made $28.8 million. So this is talking here about the weekend, so talking about the 3-day weekend. So a $28 million opening weekend is really not all, or sorry, in the case of Hunger Games, this is its second weekend. So that would be a 35% drop. So that's very, very strong. Add to that the fact that a lot of people saw this film during the week domestically, and that is a very impressive number. All right, so a 35% hold from week 1 to week 2 is great. However, that caveat has to be added that the opening weekend, was not very strong. The opening weekend came in well underneath the expectations, well underneath the projections. And so we have to then recognize, okay, what is that third weekend going to look like? What happens when this film moves out of the holiday frame? And it's not that you have the biggest of competition set to come out next weekend. Obviously, you have Godzilla -1, which is a film I'm personally excited for. But I do think that the question is still valid nonetheless of just how much of this is the holiday frame of people being out of school, not having a lot to do, and saying, hey, well, we might as well see the Hunger Games movie, versus people actually going out of the way to try to go and see it. It's hard to say at this point. We'll know a lot more when that third weekend number comes around, though. The film Napoleon, however, we could say in its opening weekend, doing much better than I think anyone had anticipated, making $20.4 million over the 3-day, with $32.5 million over the course of its initial run. So again, a much better number. However, this film also cost $200 million, and so it still has a long way to go. It is doing quite well internationally, so that might be where it finds some of its saving grace, but it has a ways to go. We'll find out, of course, next weekend when we see the week 1 and week 2 drop off, and just how well it's doing internationally by that point also. The film Wish, on the other hand, right, rounding out the top 3, came in indeed that number 3 spot below the 3-hour war epic drama in Napoleon, making $19.5 million and barely beating out, this is again a very important point, barely beating out the second weekend for Trolls. So Trolls in its second weekend as an animated film for kids, 42% hold from week 1 to week 2. So that's a very impressive percentage-wise hold. The opening weekend was fine. So far, it's made $64.4 million. And so Trolls right now is doing basically what we could expect a film from Universal to be doing, which is have a decent opening weekend, have an even better second weekend, right? Have a, as far as just the hold is concerned. And I think that we'll probably end up seeing that film leg out quite a bit. Whereas a film like Wish, which you would expect to have a massive opening for a brand new Disney animated feature, came in the number 3 spot. And based off of how things have gone for previous Disney releases, I think that we can probably project that the film is not going to hold very well in the long run. A movie like Elemental was able to make as much money as it did, and it still didn't even break even because of how well it did down the stretch internationally. Wish is getting a similar release schedule. It is getting released slowly over time internationally. And so the thought process there, and I think Tony was the one that mentioned this last time, which is basically that they suspect the film might have similar legs to that of Elemental only because of that. The difference, though, Elemental was not universally panned, right? Elemental, at the very least, had some positive reactions from at least some segments of the audience, whether you're looking at Rotten Tomatoes scores, whether you're looking at the critic scores, just by themselves, whether you're looking at the audience, general audience scores, things like that. What you generally find is that Elemental was at the very least a middle-of-the-road movie. Wish is getting trounced by the critics. It's also not getting a lot of praise from the regular, everyday, more trustworthy critics, people like, maybe Jeremy Johns and others. And even the general audiences are just not interested in seeing it, right? The ones that are seeing it are maybe mixed at best, maybe some even leaning towards positive. But I think that just because of the brand as being so damaged, you just don't even have a lot of people going to see it in general. And so even if they do hear it's good, they'll say, oh yeah, it's still Disney and it's still modern Disney, and I don't want to bring my kids anywhere near that. I think that there is a lot to be said. We talked about this on the Salty Nerd podcast stream yesterday. Check out the Salty Nerd podcast. They're awesome. And one of the things that was brought up by one of the persons on the panel was how it used to be where you would hear about a Disney film release and you would say, all right, let's go. Let's bring the kids. Everything should be fine because it's Disney and we can trust them. Now it's at the point where a lot of parents say, you know what? I need to pre-screen this. I need to actually watch this film before I let my kids watch it because I want to make sure there's no nonsense in there that they're trying to shove down kids' throats. I think that is something that is ultimately going to hurt and is hurting their brand and will probably continue to do so. Trolls Band Together, as I mentioned, has a very strong week hold. And rounding up the top 5, we have Thanksgiving, a 31% hold there for a horror film. Very, very strong for a horror film to be able to do that. Typically, we see pretty massive drops from week 1 to week 2 for horror films. A lot of people like to see those things up front. Word of mouth on this movie has been very good, though, so I suspect that's probably why we're seeing that number hold out the way that it is. A film like The Marvels, however, because its opening weekend was so incredibly small and its second weekend drop was so massively big, on top of the small opening weekend, had a 37% hold, but also was dropped from 960 screens by Disney. So Disney is clearly not pretending to actually think this movie is doing well, and this film is essentially done, right? I think that right now, the fact that it's at 6.4 million over a holiday weekend, that tells us quite a bit about exactly how much or just how little money this movie is really going to make and just how much rather it's going to lose. It's not even going to get to $100 million domestically, most likely, if we keep these numbers, and these numbers rather keep moving forward. Looking at the numbers over here, right, talking about the Hunger Games Battle of Songbirds and Snakes, as I had mentioned, right, is the international number is coming in quite strong for this movie, and it's made about 50-50. So that's a pretty good, split between those two as far as whether a studio would want to see this or not. The problem that happens when you have a predominantly international audience is that you get a lot less return on investment for any international releases, whereas if you have an overly dominant domestic audience and a very small international, when you have large budgets, as a lot of these movies tend to have, that becomes a problem. So having a 50-50 split on a film that also costs only $100 million is pretty good. This film's break even, in a general sense, right, in a general way, would have been around $250 to $300 million or so. The film is already, after 2 weeks, at about $200 million, and so I think that there's a chance for this film to hit that break even point in and of itself. Add to that the fact that the actual break even for this movie is actually a lot smaller. Because of the financing, the way it works is essentially they made various deals with the marketing, made other various deals because of the fact that when it comes to Lionsgate, they don't have as much of an international presence in different ways. So because of that, they actually have already gotten to a position where I believe it was Tony at Deadline said roughly 120 to 130 domestic would be their break even. So, and that's if it had a terrible international. The fact that the international is doing as well as the domestic, and it's already at 98 million, it's probably going to get to $100 million by the beginning of this week. I think that we're seeing this movie is tracking to not only make money in and of itself because of its finances, but also as just a general release, even if all that extra stuff was not actually there, it would still be likely hitting that $350 million range of the break even. And we'll talk about that when we get to the charting. Napoleon at $78.8 million, as I said, doing very, very well for the type of movie that it is. For the film Wish, however, we can say this movie is just not doing well, right? $49 million is where the film's international is. It just eked out $31.7 million. Would not surprise me to see that number come in lower when the actuals come in, because that's just been kind of the nature of the beast when it comes to these Disney releases. The only good thing about Wish is the GOAT, because Alan Tudyk does the voice for it, and I love pretty much anything that Alan Tudyk does. The rest of the film is very uninspired, and the connections they try to make to other Disney films and other Disney releases is just atrocious. It's something where it seems like they like, hey, we need to make a movie that has random connections to the origins of these various characters and these random stories, and then said, let's just do this. And it just did not end well at all, and it just did not actually work well. In fact, it's working so poorly. Look at these numbers here. So remember, Wish has the Thanksgiving holidays. So this film has about, Tuesday evening or Wednesday evening, Wednesday, Thursday showings. So it's got the 5-day open versus the 3-day open. So in 5 days of release, Wish has gotten to $31.7 million. Compare that to Elemental's release, which had a much more traditional 3-day release schedule, and that film made $29.6 million, was also quite low. That also speaks to the fact that Elemental, over a non-holiday frame, yes, it was released over the summertime, so one could argue that point, but we all know that the holiday frame is when a lot of people tend to go, right, as far as just dedicated time for the theaters rather than just a general, summertime weekend, for instance. So the fact that $29.6 million is where Elemental was at its release, whereas Wish is only at $31.7 million, that means that Elemental, as we've seen, the fact that it's first Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, it edges out, right? 11 versus 8 million, Elemental to Wish, 9 versus 7, 8 versus 4. So first Sunday numbers, Elemental made twice as much on its first Sunday. So I think we're probably going to end up seeing this number continue. I think that we're going to see, especially because that Monday, right? You know that this coming Monday for Wish, it's going to drop off quite a bit, maybe to the $1 or $2 million range. So you're already going to see probably by Monday, Elemental edge the film out. And whereas this movie did see some strong holds down the stretch, especially internationally, if Wish does have that, the fact that it's already so much slower and will probably continue to slow in comparison means that Elemental's total, which again, the worldwide total for Elemental was $486 million. There was a film that still cost $200 million. So that film needed to make had to make roughly $450 million to $550 million to break even. And that's assuming a $200 million budget. So a best case scenario for Elemental was that it barely broke even, maybe made a little bit of profit when it came to a film like Wish, since this film is starting off so much lower and is not doing nearly as well internationally, at least at this point, even though it is being slow rolled, it does not bode well. And for this to be the 100th anniversary, there's a lot of reasons to why this is such a catastrophe for Disney. Not only is it an animated film from their studio on a major holiday like Thanksgiving, not getting anywhere close to even the medium range releases that they've had over the Thanksgiving frame. The only real caveat people are saying is, well, if you compare this film to Strange World, hey, at least it's not that bad, right? At least it's not as bad as that film. In fact, let's go ahead and bring that. We like doing things live here over at OMB Reviews, right? So we have the $135 million budgeted film in Strange World, not the 100th anniversary. This is a movie that most people knew nothing about because the marketing for it was just, bad, was just atrocious. So yeah, the film is doing about twice as much as Strange World. Strange World opened and had $11 million by its first Friday. It got an early release right over that same Thanksgiving frame and it had $18.8 million. And so that's like the one argument is, well, hey, at least it's not as bad as Strange World. Yeah, but this is still a far cry. They were originally thinking $40+ million domestically. I think Box Office Pro even had it upwards of $50+ million for Wish. And the fact that it's coming at 31.7, danger, 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 Will Robinson. If you have not figured that out yet, Disney, I don't know what else will. Trolls, $145.7 million. So again, doing pretty well there. Thanksgiving. In fact, let's go ahead and, again, we'd love to do things live here. Let's actually do a comparison here because I've been talking a little bit about Trolls. I don't really follow or have not really followed the Trolls franchise all that much. So let's go ahead and see if we can pull up the franchise and see how this film is doing in comparison. So unadjusted numbers, the first film in 2016, it made about $46 million. Remember that World Tour got released during the COVID year, and so because of that, there is no opening weekend. It made $48 million, but World Tour was best known because it did well on PVOD, right? Those premium rentals and premium buys, those did very well. Remember, World Tour was being talked about quite a bit back in 2020 when all that stuff was when all that stuff was going down. And so I'm not surprised then to see those numbers, as they're coming in, that this number is actually a lot lower. So obviously, if you compare and you do the contrast of this, comparing the film as far as its overall, comparing it rather to the rate of inflation, this film definitely did a lot better. We could probably say that the first Trolls did about twice as many ticket sales, just looking at this as a rough estimate as it. But the fact that it had an in-between movie that no one saw in theaters, and it still did as well as it is, I think that that's a good sign. Also, at $145 million worldwide after its opening, just recently opening, I think that it has a decent chance to at least give it a run for its money, and be, again, a decent release as far as its overall schedule is concerned. Anyway, Thanksgiving, $29 million. This film doing well historically, even by the number standards. For a horror film, a slasher film, doing very well. Marvel's, can't say the same thing. $200 million definitely looks a little bit more likely to be on the table worldwide. I think that that's probably a pretty strong likely scenario. $100 million domestic, however, I just do not see as being a possibility. Going to do the charts because we love doing charts here over at OMB Reviews. Let me go ahead and just see if I can figure out exactly what's going on here. In my charting, as you can see, I've got some error messages popping up. That's okay. Those are films that I'm not really covering all that much. But we do have some second weekend numbers for films like The Hunger Games. So let's talk about that. So right now, I'm projecting that film to get somewhere between $281 million and almost $400 million. To get to $400 million, it would need to do double the amount of money it's made so far. And as the way currently it is tracking basically with that, right? A 30% hold from week 1 to week 2. If it does that internationally, right, in all of the weekends subsequently, it would be able then, right, with those kinds of holds, it would be able absolutely to double its overall total. The chance of that happening, as I said, we'll find out a little bit more next weekend during the non-holiday frame, but the range, again, somewhere between 280 and 390. I wouldn't be surprised to see the film get somewhere between $300 and $350 million worldwide based on where it's doing right now. Because it only costs $100 million, though, that would mean that its profits would be somewhere between roughly $20 million and around $86 million. So I think that the film probably will end up being about a $50 to $100 million profited movie. So it will essentially be able to justify its existence by making back its budget, right? By being able to make back, as far as net gain, net values, its budget. But to say that this is going to be a huge success, I think is a bit of a misnomer when you especially realize and recognize that this is within its own franchise. If this was a brand new release, right? If this was a brand new film with a brand new franchise or trying to start a new franchise, this would be a win, right? This would absolutely be a way to start off your franchise. But when this is a movie that's a part of a franchise that is used to making hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars, that's not the kind of money you want to see. Even if you were to argue, well, remember, they have some financing, meaning that the money that they'll make is actually going to be higher than what your projections are. I would say, okay, you could definitely say that because we do know it has been very upfront. They have been upfront at the very least with how their financing worked, so that their break-even point's a lot less. But even so, you still are not going to get anywhere close to the amount of money that the original films in the franchise were actually making. And again, because we'd like to do things live here, let's go ahead and just pull that up for a second because I do think it is important. Now, again, these are the unadjusted numbers, but when we talk about those other films, what were they, right? The last film, $646 million worldwide, $766, $864, $677. This movie is not going to get anywhere close to that, right? We're talking about maybe $400 million at the top. So we're talking about $200+ million less. Millions upon millions of tickets less than what the last films did. And so I think that is where you have to look at it from, as where does it stand within the actual franchise it's a part of, and it's a loser in that instance, right? So even if it does make them money, and again, that's a good thing to make money, but you need a little bit more than that if you're trying to restart a franchise or do anything like that. Based on the end of the movie, it'd be very hard for me to see them try to continue it on, but again, Hollywood's out of ideas, so I could totally see them doing that as well. For a film like Thanksgiving, which costs only $15 million, that film is expected to make about $10 million, probably roughly, in actual and overall profits. It's currently about $5 million in the red. Because it has such a strong hold, though, as a horror film, I would not be surprised to see this film get to its break-even point by next weekend, so it could end up doing a little bit better. I have the max projection on that movie around $58 million by the end of its run. Trolls Band Together, again, I have the max being around $216 million, and so it would have to see some pretty strong holds if it hopes to beat that. Again, obviously, we have had chart breakers in the past year where films have done so much better than the initial projections, because there is that holiday frame as a part of it that can sometimes make predicting these kinds of weeks and these kinds of films a little bit more difficult. But the film is definitely tracking well enough to where I think that it probably will end up doing better than these numbers here. Could actually even make its money back. Would not surprise me, though historically it's not likely because of the kind of movie it is and because of how well that film did PVOD. it just wouldn't surprise me to see that film kind of break even by the end of it. Now, the number they gave us for films like Napoleon and Wish were around $200 million. So that means the break even somewhere around $500 million or so. To probably roughly $600 million to be its actual break-even point. And so because of that being the case, what we can then take from this and what we can gather from this is that both films right now are well over $200 million in the red. Now, whereas a film like Napoleon is showing a lot of strength, a lot more strength domestically, and some strength internationally, Wish is not showing any of that. And so I would not be surprised if by the end of the run, a film like Napoleon could end up getting very close to a break-even, whereas a film like Wish, the question, of course, is going to be, what kind of film's losses is going to be? Is this going to be in the top 5 losses of this year? Is it going to be close to the $200+ million lost by Killers of the Flower Moon? Is it going to be close to the $200+ million lost by the Marvels? I think that right now we're talking about Wish being in that same category. I don't think, based on what we're seeing right now, that it's going to perform and leg out like Elemental did. It might make more down the line internationally, but because it's not doing anything domestically and really, it's really not seeing those numbers, and because it's not getting a lot of support in that arena, it just would not surprise me. But those are the numbers as they currently stand. What are y'all's thoughts about this? Do you think that Wish is going to come out of nowhere because of its extended international release and make its money back? I have a lot of doubts about that. What are your thoughts about Hunger Games: Battle of the Songbird Snakes? Again, right now, it's on the way to profitability, both because of its finances and also as just a regular release. But do you think that it's going to be a huge win? All right, again, a win, making money, I definitely think that that is something that you could argue at this point. But to say that this is going to be starting or restarting or trying to revive a franchise in some way, I just don't think there is any argument to be made, especially bringing up those numbers from the previous films in the franchise. And so what are y'all's thoughts about that? And also thoughts on Trolls Band Together, any of the other films that I mentioned, please let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. A lot of the fun of asking, smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members for the month of November, starting off with Father Luca Illich, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, the name Eagle Rider. Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. Matt317, check out his Twitch channel. Laura, the Mother Major General Story. Sorry, I didn't have enough spirit fingers there. Mr. Roy and ZK Man, who can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below. You get access to things like the giveaways channel, a podcast that I try to do every single month with a bunch of other awesome YouTubers, and a plethora of other content. So go ahead and check that out if you want more. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.